Good morning, everyone. Just want to start off saying, if I can, it's really meaningful and emotional to see you all here because that means you're all here in support of a land that we love and that our people loves and that I hope you love. And even if it's just to get more information, it means that you care. And that means a lot to us. So thank you for being here.
So, yesterday afternoon, we were at a bat mitzvah party here at Temple, and Lindy said to me at a certain point, "Come here," and took me right to my office to tell me that Israel was under attack. And in those first few moments, when we were just trying to assess the situation and see what was going on, I was thinking to myself, well, tomorrow's talk is going to be totally irrelevant, even because of what might have happened yesterday might have been totally devastating for Israel. And so this whole discussion would be totally different. And the information that we are going to share with you would have been old history. But thank God that didn't happen. I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about, I hope. That for the first time ever, Israel was attacked by Iran by ballistic missiles and drones that came directly from Iranian territory, along with the other countries where proxies of Iran have military installations in Yemen and in Syria and in Iraq, believe it or not. In all these places, Iran's tentacles of power and disruption throughout the Middle East are there, and ballistic missiles and drones. This was, I heard military experts mentioning yesterday, was the largest drone attack in history. That never before has any military power or nation sent so many rockets and drones all at one time towards an enemy. Thank God, this was not a surprise, actually, because Iran was threatening that they were going to do this. They were very open about it, that they felt the need to retaliate for the attack going back, a week and a half now, of Israel, although they've never directly said they did it, but everybody knows they did, on a compound of a Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. And why did they do that? They were actually targeting military leaders who orchestrate all these attacks upon Israel from Yemen and from Syria and from Lebanon. These were not good guys. And they were not just consulate officials who issue passports. These were the military leaders who orchestrate those attacks on Israel, and that's why they targeted them. But Iran felt the need to retaliate, and they said they were going to do it, and they did. And so Israel was prepared for it, very confident. And the big surprise, and something to applaud, is that Israel was not alone yesterday in defending itself. Almost unbelievably, the UK and France both had their fighter jets flying in cooperation with Israeli jets. The majority of these drones and ballistic missiles were actually taken out of the sky by those fighter jets from these three countries, in addition to Israel's Iron Dome and the higher level anti-missile capabilities that they have, the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, et cetera, et cetera. And Jordan took down the ballistic missiles and the drones that were flying over its territory. Jordan, who has not had a very positive posture towards Israel in the last 6 months. So all these countries cooperated, and 99% of the projectiles that were fired towards Israel yesterday were taken out. There was one casualty, ironically, of an Arab Druze young girl, a Bedouin in the south of Israel, who was hit by shrapnel falling from the sky from, no doubt, one of these drones that were taken out. So, at least for now, we're all breathing a sigh of relief. And at least for now, it's in this tit for tat, Israel can claim a victory that it showed its strength and its capability to do what it did yesterday. And the big remaining question will be what and if there will be a response in the days or the weeks to come. The official line so far from the defense minister Gallant is Israel will, choose its day and time at its discretion when to respond. So there's no immediate response. And of course, the Biden administration said, if you're going to respond, we're not going to be by your side in the counterattack, because the object is to de-escalate the tensions.
Was the United States supposed to participate?
Did I not say that? Oh, I forgot. France, the UK, and the United States had their pilots and their planes in the air yesterday taking these projectiles down. So that was the good news. Anyway, so that's my report on what happened yesterday, and if there's further discussion or questions, we can save that for the end of the presentation today. But Lindy and I want to get back to what we had planned for today, which was to spend the majority of our time reporting to you on the mission that we took, the Solidarity mission to Israel, along with a group of rabbis and Jewish professionals. And we want to begin by showing you a beautiful video, music video of a song that articulates in a very clear way, we think, the mood of the country and what we experienced when we were there. This is a young couple. The wife is an American Israeli. Actually, I think she was born in Israel, but her parents were both Americans, so she speaks perfect English. And they are balei tshuva, meaning they are newly religious. And they both have beautiful voices, and they sing, and they make these awesome videos. They call themselves Yonina.
Just to pay particular attention, there's going to be the translation of the lyrics when you hear it in Hebrew on the bottom, but up on the left top, it's going to state where the picture that you're seeing is from, and I want you to pay attention to that because we're going to be talking about a lot of those places because we did visit them.
And you're going to see those same places in our pictures.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
we saw all those places. And this song that they're singing, they didn't write, and it's not a new song. It's a song, I don't remember how long ago this song was written, but it fits the situation now so perfectly that it has experienced this revival, and not just Yonina, but a lot of Israeli singers are singing it again. And it was written all in Hebrew. What they did was to insert some lines of translation along with the Hebrew. So they're singing in English and in Hebrew, but the whole thing has subtitles for you to follow. It's called Ein Li Eretz Acheret, which means I have no other land.
I have no other land, even if the flames surround it.
רק מילה בעברית חודרת אלוקיי אל נשמתי בגוף כואב, בלב רעב, this is our home. I won't be silent, our land has changed.
Drenched in tears, I won't give up, I'll remind her, and I'll sing into her ears till she awakes from her sleep. אין לי ארץ אחרת גם אם אדמתי בוערת, רק מילה בעברית חודרת אל אורכי,
אל נשמתי
בגוף כואב, בלב רעב, כאן הוא ביתי. אין לי ארץ אחרת עד שתחדש ימיה, עד שתפקח את עיניה.
Beautiful song with very strong sentiments about connection to the land and the realization that this is the only place where Jews have the ability to defend themselves and to have any kind of power or ability to determine their own fate and their own future. And yet it's a land plagued with so many contradictions, a land that faces attack, a land that gets, and a country and a people that's the target of so much animus and anti-Semitism, untruths, half-truths. I mean, I think we all know so much of this. You didn't have to come to hear all of that from us. And this reflects the mood of the country today, because October the 7th and the events that happened the days that followed were so truly unprecedented in the history of the country. Going to war and being attacked is not something new for Israel. They've been fighting wars every couple of years ever since they declared their independence and were attacked by 5 Arab countries that surrounded them and miraculously survived. And, you know, we know 1956, 1967, 1973, 1981, and all the wars that Israel's had to fight to defend itself. And it seems as though they always come out victorious in the end. But truthfully, Israel hasn't really won a war since 1967. It's only won the battles, which have always kind of ended in stalemate. Because so often Israel has to fight with its hands tied behind its back because the world won't let it continue to finish the job, if you think of it from that perspective. What happened on October the 7th is so unprecedented because never before, at least not since the War of Independence, has Israel had to fight a war wholly on its own territory. Because when Hamas and its 3,000 terrorists swarmed across the border into the kibbutzim and the small cities close to the border with Gaza, they were totally taken by surprise and totally unprepared. And, we all know these numbers, I think. Somewhere about 1,200 Israelis were killed in the most despicable way in their own homes. Innocent civilians were attacked. Families were tied together and set on fire. I mean, horrible, horrible things, and we know it because the terrorists had their GoPro cameras recording it and transmitting it in real time. And that never happened before. In 1973 in the Yom Kippur War, Israel was caught by surprise. That's similarity. And the army had to respond, and it was a horrible war, and about 2,000 soldiers died. But do you know how many civilians died in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War? 0. They were fighting far away, in the north, in the territories, and in the Sinai desert. On October the 7th, this was a war. Israel, the army, was totally taken by surprise, and 1,200 civilians lost their lives. And that territory was totally undefended, and it took 3 or 4 days before the army was able to come in and find all the terrorists and take control of the territory once again. That never happened before. That's why October the 7th was so different. And can you imagine the loss of security that Israelis felt on that day? Because they always relied on that idea that the mighty IDF was there to protect them. And in fact, people who were in their homes hearing the terrorists, they were in their safe rooms and they could hear Arabic and they could hear the firing right outside their apartments, or even in their apartments, were sitting there saying, well, we'll be okay. The IDF was going to be here, any minute now. Only they didn't come. At least not right away. It took time. So that sense of security that most Israelis live with from day to day was shaken to its core. And that brought a lot of disillusionment amongst the population, who was already angry from the previous 9 months of demonstrations over judicial reform. Israelis have become professional protesters. Every weekend, hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets to protest their government and to protest what people felt was the excesses of this right-wing government that was trying to take away the power of the Supreme Court. And in fact, people who analyze the situation say, well, it's because Israel's enemies saw how disunified the country was, that this was a time of weakness. This was the perfect time to attack. But in spite of what happened, and in spite of that disillusionment, in spite of that breaking of the contract between Israel's government and the people, because what's the basic contract that people have with their government? You're going to keep us safe. That's Job number one of a government, to secure its borders and to keep its people safe. And that was taken away. That was turned upside down. And for the initial days, we all remember, it seemed like the world was, on our side, and it didn't take very long for Israel's enemies everywhere to be marching in the streets, blaming Israel again. Especially when Israel launched its, response. And Israelis see that. They watch TV just like we do. So they felt very alone in the world. But that sentiment that this is our only land was reignited in a very strong way. Ein li eretz acheret, I have no other land. So, we've been watching the news obsessively, like so many of you, ever since October the 7th, and speaking to our friends in Israel and following all the events. And when the opportunity to go on a mission arose, we jumped at it. A very good friend of ours works for a travel agency that brings groups to Israel, just like the trips that we've taken, and letting us know they were putting together a trip for rabbis and Jewish professionals, and we said, we have to go. And we have to go because we want to see with our own eyes what's happening. Because, when you look at something from afar, you only get a little piece of the picture. It's like looking through a telescope and all you can see is, this much. But you're missing everything that's over here and everything that's over there. We wanted the wider picture, so we felt we had to go. And we also felt we had to go because we wanted to show our support and our solidarity with the country by going and being there, because Israel feels so very alone. Normally, hundreds of thousands, millions of tourists travel to Israel every year. The hotels are full, the airport is jammed. Crickets. When we were in Jerusalem at the hotel and we'd go down for breakfast, they have the best breakfast in Israeli hotels. If you ever think about going to Israel, for that alone it's worth going. Breakfast buffet. All you can eat. And usually, you have to walk around the dining room to find 2 seats available. Practically empty. There's no tourism. The only people who are traveling to Israel now, by and large, are people like us, and lay people from congregations too, who are going on these solidarity missions to do what we did, which was to see and learn and experience and volunteer and to give Israel a hug, literally and figuratively. We hugged every person who we thought would be comfortable with our hug.
All were comfortable, and they all wanted to receive that hug.
But even without hugging, every person that we met, we asked, so how are you? Tell us how you're doing. And when they talked, they shared with us how they're doing. And because Israel is such a small country, there is not one person who doesn't have a brother or a cousin or a child or a parent or a best friend or a spouse who either was down near Gaza during October the 7th and might have been kidnapped or killed or survived it, thank God, or someone or many someones who are in the army. either because they're young and they're doing their regular 3 years of compulsory army service, or because they're younger than 45, meaning you continually to serve in what they call miluim, which is the military reserve. And there was a general call-up of everybody. And the response was 100%. Everybody showed up. They gather together with their units, and then they're sent off to wherever it is they're needed. It was truly remarkable. But because, again, it's such a small country and everybody knows somebody that's in the thick of it, they were experiencing it firsthand, not secondhand or third hand. They all had a story to tell. Oh, I guess I'm talking a lot. All right, we have a bunch of slides. Rabbis tend to do that. We have a bunch of slides. We want to take you with us on the trip and show you some of the highlights and do a little storytelling, and Lindy's going to chime in and share some of those stories. So the first thing, oh, what do you see? Yeah. You know, for lots of complicated reasons, we did our Purim spiel like 2 weeks before Purim because it coincided with the spring break and a lot of people were going to be away. And so, okay, we did it 2 weeks ago. Totally forgot it was Purim until we got to the airport in LAX and we're waiting in line at the LL counter. And we were way back in the line. I look, and all the clerks and attendants behind the desk at the LA counter were wearing funny, colorful hats. And I said, what is going on? We're going to Israel because there was a war and they're wearing funny hats? And then the light went on. Oh, it's Purim today. And then we got to the gate. And this group of people, they were doing a Megillah reading at the gate at LAX with groggers and boo Haman and the whole deal. Unbelievable. And then we got on the plane.
And when we got off the plane at Ben Gurion, everything hit you. Everywhere from the second you got off till you got to the baggage, there are signs, as you can see. And, oops, sorry. Let's see if I can do this. And this is just going on the escalator. Every hostage.
I guarantee you in Israel, nobody is tearing down these posters.
It's very powerful, just getting off the plane.
And we decided we needed to go to Jerusalem. We stayed in a hotel in Jerusalem during the mission, and there's a brand new train that wasn't there last time we were in Israel. Direct service to Jerusalem, like 35 minutes for like less than $5. Let's take the train. So we found the train and bought our ticket and got on the train. What do you see? Purim! So surprised. The train was packed.
Children dressing up in costume. If you see the young girl and young boy, that's not how they normally dress. They're dressing like their parents. And if you see the father on the left.
You see the father there with the big stroimel fur hat, you know, Haredi, ultra-Orthodox. He's not in costume. That's how he dresses all the time.
And then
His kids are dressed as him. That was their Purim costumes. And of course, there were other kids in, you know, Power Rangers and
Then
other
we
stuff.
got to Jerusalem, and everywhere we looked, it was Purim.
And it's actually Shushan Purim. If you live in a walled city, You celebrate Purim one day later. So it was because, we were flying. It took a day to get to Israel. So by now it was Shushan Purim. So everyone was headed to Jerusalem to do Shushan Purim. And literally dancing in the streets. You know the yin and the yang? We went to Israel to put our arms around people because they were attacked. We did not expect Purim to be full throttle. And it was, I'm told, much more muted this year than it is in other years. But they were still celebrating Purim. They were still dancing in the streets, and we didn't want to miss it. So, silly us, we decided to walk from the train all the way to the hotel, 2.5 miles, dragging our bags. But I didn't want to miss it. The first day of the mission, for those who could get there quick enough, was half a day of volunteering. And they took us to a place called Kfar Chabad, just coincidentally, that has fields that are actually leased and rented by farmers from throughout Israel to grow. And we were picking oranges. 3 hours of picking oranges. And it felt so good to be doing something to actually, in a tangible way to help the country. And the reason this was necessary is normally this produce, these oranges, are now picked by workers from Thailand and other third world countries, and Palestinian workers who come across from Gaza and from the West Bank and are paid a fair wage to do this kind of labor. Only most of the Thai workers left the country after October the 7th and have yet to return. And there's quite a heavy restriction now, as you could imagine. Very few workers can come in from the West Bank and zero from Gaza at this point. So they don't have enough labor to pick all the produce. As far as the eye could see, we were looking at rows and rows of these beautiful orange trees. And our group of 15, in 3 hours, did 3 trees. Three trees.
3 full trees. And there's thousands and thousands of...
There's a lot of oranges on a tree, believe me.
We picked 2 tons of oranges in 3 hours. But there are thousands of oranges that will go unpicked and will fall on the ground and rot because there's not enough. And this is a picture of our group of people.
Mighty orange pickers. Okay, what's next? Okay. Actually, that first evening, so we picked oranges half a day and back, and we had a few hours of free time, and then we had an Israeli intellectual. His name is Micha Goodman. And he speaks a perfect English. He spent much of his life living in the States, but he's very Israeli. And remember that name, Micha Goodman. You can find him on lots of podcasts, and he writes lots of articles, and he has a wonderful way of explaining kind of what's happening in Israel and brings a certain perspective to it. And he's very energetic and animated. Believe me, he can't sit in a chair and speak for an hour. He was like, and the main point of his talk, that my takeaway, is that for the longest time we assumed that Israel was divided pretty evenly between the right and the left. And in Israel, when you say the right, you mean religious, ultra-nationalists, believes that the entire land of Israel was given by God, and we have a right to hold it and to conquer it, what they call Greater Israel, meaning the green line separating the so-called West Bank from Israel proper needs to go away, and all that territory needs to be, and Gaza, back again, should be governed and part of Israel. I'm simplifying, but that's the right wing, versus the left wing, which is secular, highly educated, not believing in all that I just said, but that we need to come to some kind of accommodation with the Palestinian neighbors, a two-state solution. So the belief was that Israel was pretty evenly divided between those two poles, right and left. But what he's discovered through polling is actually about 80% of the country is in the middle, between the right and the left, and incorporate kind of the best of both sides. That there's a growing realization of the reality of the situation, that there's no clear victory on either side. Meaning Israel's never going to realize that dream of the greater Israel. That's just not going to happen. And that although we need some kind of an accommodation, a two-state solution, that's not happening anytime soon either. We're kind of stuck in the middle, and we need to do small incremental steps to make life better for everyone. So that was kind of my takeaway from the talk. Next, Sderot. So next morning, we got on our bus, and we headed down to what they call the Gaza envelope, that territory, a couple of miles surrounding the border of the Gaza Strip, to visit Sderot and a couple of other visits there. Sderot is the largest, it's not that big, it's 28,000 people. It's the closest town, or you could call it city, to the Gaza Strip. And I'm not sure if you've heard about this. We've heard all about the kibbutzim that were attacked and the atrocities that took place there. But at 6:30 in the morning, October the 7th, hundreds of terrorists poured into Sderot on their white Toyota pickup trucks with their Kalashnikov rifles, shooting everyone in sight. And eventually
70 residents were killed.
70 residents of Sderot were killed. It was early in the morning, so there weren't that many people out on the street yet. And the rockets were simultaneously in the air, the Qassam rockets in an unprecedented volume. So the sirens were blaring, so people went into their safe rooms. This is a rack that used to sit behind the police station, and what you see there are the remains of those Qassam rockets that are made in factories in the tunnels in the Gaza Strip from irrigation pipes.
I'm not sure if you said it, but this particular town has been inundated with rockets, thousands of rockets, for over 20 years. So they're used to their sirens going off. They generally don't take them that seriously because they have safe areas, rooms, or places outside where they can go and run and stay in, and it'll, keep them safe from the rockets unless there is a direct hit. So you have to understand that very clearly about safe rooms.
That's why Israel developed its Iron Dome system to take these out of the sky. But before there was an Iron Dome, people lived in Sderot. If you live in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem and the sirens go off because rockets are headed your way, you have 20 seconds, to get into a safe room, because it's going to take time for that projectile to reach you. If you live in Sderot, you have about 5 seconds, because it's that close. So we went to Sderot, and we met with this rabbi. He's an Orthodox rabbi, Sephardi rabbi, Mizrahi, and he told us his personal story of what happened that morning. He heard the sirens go off, but didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary, because that's a normal occurrence if you live in Sderot. The rockets go off, and then it's over with. an hour later, you go on with your life. And he thought, okay, it's just like any other day. Well, if you remember, October the 7th was Simchat Torah. Wonderful, joyous celebration. So he headed to the synagogue to go get out the candy and prepare for the celebration that day. Only it wasn't like any other day. And while he was walking to the synagogue from his apartment, suddenly the terrorists were racing through the streets in their trucks, and he heard bullets, whizzing by him, and it took him a few minutes to realize that he got shot. And a bullet went right through him, thankfully just missing his heart. But he kept walking because he was still walking. And
Went into the synagogue.
Went to the synagogue and told us more stories about what happened to him that day, but it was very dramatic to hear that personal testimony. The other thing that happened in Sderot that was not widely reported, but some of you might heard about it, was that they went not only into the town driving up and down the streets, but a whole group of them converged on the police station in Sderot, because the police station is the symbol of power, it's the symbol of protection, it's the symbol of Israel's sovereignty. So they stormed into the police station. This is a small little town. There were not that many officers there at 6 a.m. So they totally overrun the station. And so now they're calling, of course, for everybody to come, and the police who hadn't even arrived yet or were not on duty, that shift, everyone came racing to the station, and a huge gunfight ensues in the police station in Sderot. Many were killed. The army finally did arrive later that day in the afternoon, early evening, when they realized that there were no more Israeli officers alive in the building, but it was still filled with Hamas terrorists. They bombed the building. The Israelis themselves took down the building. There's a picture of it.
Now, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's just dirt.
Yeah, this is a picture that we found on the internet. In the weeks and months following, they cleared away all the debris, and what's there now is an empty lot. Do you have that picture? What's the next picture? Oh, you already showed the mural. So it's an empty lot now. And they're going to have a permanent memorial and maybe a small museum on the site in time to come. But that's an important story that not too many people know. There's the mural.
To some of you, this might look familiar. People who were with us, I think, in 2018. We went to this site called the Salad Trail. And this is Uri, and he spoke to us. But this is not from then. This is from 2 weeks ago.
So who remembers the Salad Trail? It's a great place. One of those, we took the desert and we made it bloom kind of stories. Although what they're growing there is all in huge greenhouses. They do hydroponic farming, and they grow the most delicious tomatoes and strawberries, and all the tour groups, or if you're going in that area, the tour groups go, you get a talk from Uri alone, and you go in, you get to pick tomatoes and strawberries, and it's all a big shtick. Well, we went there not to get the shtick, although we did get a little shtick. But for him to also tell the story of what happened to him and his family, because he lives in that Gaza envelope, and his family lives at Kfar Aza, which is one of the kibbutzim that had the worst of the attack. So, and this is him. Even before October the 7th, you get to see this That's one of those Qassam rockets you see on the table there. And that Chanukia is made by a local artist who takes all those Qassam, the shrapnel and the pieces of the spent rockets, and he makes mezuzot, and he makes Hanukkah menorah, all out. And we're going to take your instruments of war, and we're going to make holy things out of them. You know, it's a beautiful story. But he also talked about what happened to his family. The chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Whoops.
Where's the chair?
Oh,
Oh, there's the delicious strawberries.
I already showed them. Let's see if I can find them. Sorry. I don't.
Okay, you look for it. While he was giving us his talk and he began to talk about October the 7th and what happened, he has a chair, this broken down chair. There it is. And he says to us, you see this chair? That's worth $100 million to me. And he tells you the story of the chair, that it sat in his son's house, and they have 4 kids. And the kids were climbing on the chair and they broke it. And so he took the chair from the living room and threw it in their safe room. You've heard about these safe rooms where Israelis go to shelter when the missiles are coming. In most homes, it's an extra room in your house. And by law, every house for I don't know how many years now that you build in Israel has to have a safe room. The walls they're thicker, they're fortified cement, they have special windows and doors.
Usually the Israelis use it for storage. Extra toilet
Or an
paper.
extra bedroom.
Well, yeah.
So he threw this chair, this broken chair, in the safe room. And October the 7th, when the terrorists came and the rockets were flying, the family was in the safe room. Those safe rooms are not designed to keep you safe from a terrorist breaking into your house. They're only designed to protect you from rockets falling from the sky. The doors don't lock. And they have a handle on the inside and a handle on the outside. So when those terrorists broke into all those homes on the kibbutzim, they were pulling at the door on the outside. And when some people were on the inside holding on to the doorknob to prevent it from being opened, they shot them through the door. But Uri Alon's son had this broken chair, and he propped it up against the doorknob, because doorknobs in Israel are like a handle. He propped up that broken chair, and that's why the terrorists couldn't get into their safe room, because of that broken chair.
So I'm going to tell you a story. It's horrific, and it's also of some survival. And it's about Hadar and Itai Berdichevsky. They lived in Kfar Aza, where Uri, that you just saw from the salad trail, his son and daughter-in-law also lived. So they were residents together, and everybody knows each other and our family. Hadar and Itai were both 30 years old. And they had 10-month-old twins. And the sirens went off. So again, like Jason said, they didn't get concerned. They're going to go in their safe room as they usually do. And Hadar went into the kitchen. Itai took the twins into the safe room. And Hadar was making bottles for the twins. A terrorist saw her from the outside and shot her dead on the floor.
Through the window.
I'm so sorry to tell you these things, but I want you to know what happened. Itai then saw his wife and went to go into the safe room, put his twins together in a crib that was farther away on the side of the room. put them together. He was holding the door, and unfortunately, they shot through the door and he was killed. The horror of this and the gruesomeness of how things happened that day is that the terrorists that were inside the house, they stayed there with the babies crying for 10 hours, waiting as bait, hoping that residents would hear, which they did, would hear these babies cry and come so that they could kill more people. And the stories are that many residents of the kibbutz did hear those babies crying, and they couldn't do anything about it. They had to stay where they were. After 14 hours, a brave soldier, Tomer Greenberg, 35 years old. You might have heard about him. He's one of the heroes of October 7th. He heard about the babies on the kibbutz. Along the way, getting there, he killed many terrorists. He finally found those babies. He's from the Golani Brigade.
In the same unit with Itai, the father of the twins who was killed. They knew each other.
They were friends. When he got there, the terrorists were eliminated in the house, and he literally washed his hands before he picked up the babies because he had such, well, you can imagine how much he had gone through before he got there. It was the first time that he let his emotions go, and he wept.
Not just Tomer, but the soldiers that were with them, a whole unit of Israeli soldiers, after experiencing all that they had experienced and seen with their own eyes, that was the first time they cried, all of them.
But they did rescue those babies. They brought them into a tank where there was some other soldier that was hurt, and they rescued the babies. And Tomer vowed that he would celebrate those babies' 1-year birthday with them. And to top it all off, Tomer was killed in Gaza on their birthday. Now the story is connected to Uri on the Salad Trail because Uri's son and daughter-in-law, Tom and Ophir, decided, along with their own children, to adopt these twins. So they became a family which was 4, now of 6. And they are taking care of these twins and have committed themselves to their entire life taking care of their friends' babies. So Uri was talking about how he was now a grandfather to all of these kids, and he, in the middle of the week, he works on his farm, and then every weekend he and his wife go to help and take care of this. This is what happened on Kfar Aza. And we also went to Kfar Aza, which has about 900 residents in it before October 7th. And we met a beautiful, wonderful woman, Urit, who was very brave and took us around her kibbutz that she grew up in. And this kibbutz is right there on the border. When we were standing there,
About a mile and a half away.
With her, we could see the fence, and we could see Gaza with our bare eyes, and hear bombs going off and gunfire. Thankfully, not towards us. It was going the other way. But that's how they live on this kibbutz. And she told us of the story of her mother who is in her 80s, 84, who lived alone in her home, and she was going into her safe room when the sirens went off, just like everybody else in the kibbutz. Now, nobody knows what's going on. They're communicating through a WhatsApp, if you know what that is. And that's how the kibbutz communicates. All the members are on the WhatsApp, and they say, oh, there's sirens going off, get into your safe room. And at the beginning, nobody knew anything. They just thought it was the normal everyday siren, and they'd be in there for a few minutes, and then they'd come out. So Urit's mother went into her safe room, and she didn't bring any water or food or anything because she thought she would be there for a few minutes and then go out. A rocket, she heard a huge boom. A rocket hit, as you can see, the roof of her house, which was right outside her safe room. And what saved her was that rubble and all the roofing that came down fell in front of the door of the safe room. So the terrorists couldn't get in, didn't even know she was in there, and couldn't get in. And she was in that safe room for 30 hours by herself, 84. Survived. This is what one of the rooms looked like, and you can see all of the bullet holes. There were 62 people murdered from this kibbutz on October 7th. Urit went to 8 funerals a day, and it took 3 weeks because there were dozens and dozens of homes burned, and they couldn't identify everybody that had been killed, and it took over 3 weeks to identify everybody.
And 19 people were taken hostage from Kfar Aza. And in the cleanup, after the fighting was over, in the days and weeks that followed, Zaka, who takes care of the bodies, picked up the bodies of 250 dead Hamas terrorists. Just to give you the idea of the scale of the attack.
This kibbutz, that when you enter the kibbutz, you first enter and you go through what they call the youth village. And these are the youth that are out of the army. They just got out of the army. They're
Young adults.
Young adults in their early 20s, and they get their independent places to live. And that night, they were celebrating till 4:30 in the morning the birthday of one of the kids on that kibbutz. And they were having a beautiful time. And little did they know that it was the last time for that boy who celebrated his birthday, because he was murdered that day. And they killed 7 young adults, and 4 of them were kidnapped. When you go walk through the neighborhood, you see the sign, Ophir Shoshani was murdered in this house. There are signs in front of every house.
As you can imagine, it was a surreal experience to be there.
You know what? These kibbutzniks that live on the border, they believe in peace. They lived there because they believed in peace. They actually believed that there could be peace between them and the Gazans. In fact, examples of that, Ilana and David, who lived on kibbutz on this Kfar Aza, they would literally take one day off a week to help Gazan children go to hospitals to get medical treatment.
In Israel.
They'd bring
pick them up
they'd
at the
pick 'em
border
up.
and drive them to Jerusalem, to the hospital, or Tel Aviv, stay there all day, and then drive them back at the end of the day.
both Ilana and David were murdered that day, and residents took their phones and tried to make contact with those people that they had helped to ask them what was going on. Radio silence. They never answered. Arit, she ended her time with us telling us how much she appreciated our visit and how much she appreciated people coming to Israel to support them. She said, it's impossible that people don't believe these stories. It happened to my best friends. How could people not believe it? This is why we went. We want you to tell people this happened. There are people denying that this happened. Orit said, you're here. We are one. We are one Israel. And she said at the very end, she said, I'd really love to hug you. And every one of the 16 of us went up to her and gave her a really long hug.
That's me. She also said something that was very, in a way, hard to hear, but so honest and open. She said, we believe in peace. We had that dream. We reached out to our neighbors across the border in Gaza, and we tried to, make peace, to know each other as human beings. But if it comes to a question of the survival of my family or your family, I picked my family.
Let's go on to the Nova Festival.
So the Nova Festival, I'm sure you've all heard a lot of the reporting on the Nova Festival. There were 4,000 people at this dance festival, not just Israelis. There are young people who go to these festivals all around the world. So there were people from, I don't remember the number, from over a dozen different countries. Not all Jewish, just young people there to dance and celebrate life. It's always kind of in the background, world peace. That's what they were doing that day. And when Hamas came across the border, they actually didn't know that that festival was there, that's what they were going to run into. They knew, they had plans. They were going to Sderot, they were going to Kfar Aza, and to the other kibbutzim and settlements in the area. They had a lot of intelligence because of the Gazan workers who crossed the border every day to work in Israel and to go back at night. They brought all this, maps. When they entered the kibbutzim, they knew where the armory was, and they knew the layout of those kibbutzim. They didn't know that this festival was going to coincidentally be taking place on that day. But when they discovered it, they turned around and overran it. And I'm sure you've seen the films and heard some of the reporting on it. 360 young people were gunned down and killed at this festival. They were defenseless. They ran into the fields in every direction. It's in the middle of fields. There's not a building in sight. It's just surrounded by fields and terrain. And they were hiding in bushes and under, behind trees, any little place that they could find any kind of shelter. But they were totally overrun. 40 of them were taken hostage. When you go there today, there's a makeshift memorial. The government, nobody comes in and plans these memorials. It's family members, it's friends who just come to visit, and it's very moving to be there and to see. Did you do that video already?
No.
Went too far. that was the only sound, the fluttering of those flags in the wind. All these lives cut short. Coca-Cola?
Yeah. Sorry, the video is... Just to give a little bit of personal twist to this, this festival, our kids, we went in 2005 to Israel. We took a trip. Who was there with us? 2005. It was one of our biggest trips, our first really big trip. And we stayed afterwards for a month with our family. And we were down in Ashkelon in southern Israel. You've heard of Ashkelon. It's constantly being bombarded. And we stayed with our friend Dory. And our kids were, I think, 12, 14, and 16 or something around there.
More or less
13,
the same
15.
age as her 3 kids.
Yeah. And they decided there was a festival. They have these things all the time in Israel, and it's called the Coca-Cola Festival. And it was an all-night festival. And Dory said, oh, let the kids go. By themselves. Me letting my 3 sons go overnight in Israel to a festival, and I wouldn't be close to them. And when I found out about the Nova Festival, I mean, it was, can you imagine? Can you imagine sending your kid to a music festival and to never come home, or to know that they were somewhere, dead or alive? It's unfathomable.
After the Nova Festival, we were taken to 2 sites that they called car graveyards. You could imagine with 4,000 people converging in the middle of nowhere for a music festival, there's a lot of cars. Everybody coming down, and they're just, we're parked on the edge of where the dance took place. And when the terrorists came, everyone who could ran to their car and tried to escape. Sadly, a lot of them, that was the wrong decision, because they headed down the road that Hamas was coming up on, and so they were just killed. And so there were cars everywhere. Many of them had been set on fire and were, riddled with bullets and destroyed. And so in the months after, they've hauled all these cars to 2 sites they call car graveyards. You can see, obviously, these cars had been burned. And the forensic scientists have to come in and inspect every single car, because a lot of people died in these cars. But they were so destroyed from the fire and everything that happened that it's very hard to find any remains. In fact, in some cases, the Israeli rabbinate agreed, and what they did was to bury these cars because they couldn't extract the bodies from them. And you can't leave a body unburied. So they buried the whole car. So very powerful to go and see these cars. Everywhere in the country. You see the sign? Can anyone read that? Yachad Nenetzach, which means together we will win, or together we will prevail. And that very much is the mood of the country, that this thing happened to us, but we have the wherewithal to respond to it. And so this was painted, or it's on banners everywhere around the country. The next day we began at Mount Herzl, which is the National Cemetery in Jerusalem. It's kind of like Arlington National Cemetery. It's the military cemetery. And we met with this gentleman, Nissim Naim Naor, who's a progressive rabbi. But in the Miluim, in the military reserves, right before October the 7th, he was given the job of coordinating with the family of fallen soldiers when a soldier dies for what kind of funeral is going to take place at Mount Herzl. There's a lot of latitude for the family to make choices about, the ceremony and who's going to preside and how it's going to happen. So he had this job before October 7th, and then October 7th happened. 400 soldiers were killed on October 7th alone. And then in the weeks that followed, many more have died. I think over 700 soldiers at this point have died in the fighting. So in those initial weeks following October the 7th, he was working 35-hour shifts, working nonstop. They were having funerals from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, 2 at a time. 20 a day. Never before with that kind of volume. And he explained the whole thing to us. One of the beautiful things in his telling of the story was how Israel responds, how the families, how the neighbors, how everyone comes out to support these grieving families. And it begins with a funeral procession from the home of the parents or the spouse of the fallen soldier, from the home all the way to the cemetery, where the neighbors line the streets so they feel the presence and the support of all their friends and family, to the gatherings at the cemetery for the funerals themselves. People we know were attending funerals every day of people they didn't know. There's a funeral, we have to go support the family. Thousands of people at every funeral. Okay. Later that day we went to what they call Hostage Square. It's in the courtyard of the Tel Aviv Museum, right in the middle of bustling modern Tel Aviv, a big beautiful art museum, and there's a big courtyard right there, and it has become a gathering place for the families of the hostages. And there are all kinds of art installations there and interesting displays. None of it planned by the government. It's just the hostage families and friends and supporters coming out and putting up these things. That was a sign of how many days, how many hours, how many minutes since the hostages were taken. This was the Shabbat table. Remember our Shabbat table here? This was the first place that they had a Shabbat table, in this courtyard with seats for every one of the 250 plus hostages who were taken. And this one...
And this is how it looks now, how they've changed it. Because this is how they see the hostages being kept.
The beautiful Shabbat table on one side with the beautiful cloth and the plates and the glass and this side with how the hostages are living, drinking dirty water and getting maybe a pita, very little to eat. Some of the art installations there, empty chairs.
It says Akshav, now.
An hourglass, time is running out.
There's artwork everywhere. There was a lot in Hostage Square. We also did a tour called a graffiti tour, which some of you have done with us, but now it's with all sorts of art about 10/7.
And a mock Hamas tunnel made of, cardboard, plaster, that you can walk through. And this is me. Lindy I didn't even know she was behind me filming me, walking through this tunnel. And as I'm sure you've heard in the news reports, there are hundreds of miles of tunnels in Gaza where the Hamas infrastructure and the terrorists and the leaders and the commanders are all hiding underground with the civilian population of Gaza above them as a human shield. And most likely the hostages are also in these tunnels, not seeing the light of day. Even though I had been to Kfar Aza and saw all the destruction you saw in the pictures, and I saw the car graveyards, for some reason going through that tunnel just hit me emotionally. It was so real. For me, that was the first time I cried on our visit.
And that you saw the sign at the very end of the tunnel, and it says, Yihi Or, there will be light.
Let there be light.
Let there be light. Also at Hostage Square, they have a big tent with pictures of all the hostages, and they have chairs set around so that hostage families can gather in there. And we were honored to meet Noga, who is the aunt of Alon Ohel. And Alon, she wanted us to hear about him. You know, he's not just another face on a piece of poster board. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He was 23. He is, God willing, 23 years old. He was a talented jazz pianist. In his senior year of high school, he spent all of his extra hours studying for the piano so that he could take this special test. And he's a very social person, had lots of friends, and he sacrificed to become a very, very excellent pianist. And he went into the army with pride, and this last year he came to his aunt and his friends and he said, I want to take some time and I want to travel out of the country. I want to go to India and Thailand and Vietnam, and I want to do it alone. And his aunt, Noga, said, why do you want to do it alone? You have all these friends to go with you. And he said, it's my time to grow up. It's my time to experience life as an adult, and it's important for me to do this. I can go where I want, when I want, and I want to do this. This was probably one of the, all I do is cry. This was probably one of the most emotional times for me because I could relate to it. My son Jory, who many of you know, also went traveling. He did do Thailand and Vietnam, but he also went away for 10 months by himself because he wanted to see if he could do it, which of course he could. But again, it's like these are our children. They're not just faces on the poster board. We have to know their story. Unfortunately, Alon for him, he was so excited he got tickets to the Nova Festival. And you know, they don't tell you at these festivals where it's even going to be until 2 hours before the festival, which is why the terrorists didn't know either, because the location had been secret. And Alon went with 5 friends of his later in the morning because he wanted to get like the good stuff that he could hear. He knew it was happening in the morning. He arrived at the Nova Festival 14 minutes before the terrorists started parachuting in and the rockets came. And he and his friends ran to his car that they drove there. They started driving north, and they stopped at the closest shelter on the road. There are, like sometimes at bus stops and everything, you can see big shelters. And they stopped at one. There were a bunch of other people in that shelter. The shelter was made for about 10 people, and there were at least 29 people in that shelter. And they were there for several hours, and you've probably heard this story. This was all captured on video. There's no disclaiming it. It happened. There were 6 or 7 terrorists outside of the safe house, and they started throwing grenades into the room. And a brave young man would throw the grenade back out when it was thrown in. 7 times grenade was thrown in, and he threw it out, and the 8th time it exploded, and he was killed, as were most of the people in there. And the ones that weren't, the terrorists came in and shot the rest of the people and took 4 hostages, and Alon was one of them.
I
Because
think from that incident, you've heard so much about Hirsch Goodman, his mother's,
gold, yeah,
I think he's also one of the
golden.
hostages from
They
that
found,
shelter.
video that the terrorists posted themselves online of Alon. So the family feels happy because they saw him alive. And they stay optimistic. They go everywhere in and out of the country talking about the hostages needing to come home. And they want us to keep all the hostages in our heart. Of course, we have no idea at this point if any of them are alive. We only hope. But what Noga asked us to do is to take a picture. We have Alon's picture here on a chair. Take Alon, his story. Find another hostage that you can find out their story, know something about them, and put them in an empty chair at your Seder table, at your Pesach table. Bring the hostages into our homes. We can't forget them. That was her message to us. We can't forget them.
One other interesting piece, a yellow ribbon has come to symbolize a hostage, and there are yellow ribbons all around Israel. Well, the friends and the family of Alon, because he is a musician and a piano player, have put pianos painted yellow, or in part painted yellow. They're all around Israel in public places, and I understand in other public places all around the world, in solidarity with Alon.
We see the time, and we have a few more things we'd like to share with you, and we understand if you have to leave for workshop or book group or whatever it is, but we're going to continue for a few minutes telling you a few more things of what we experienced after our mission, because all of this through Hostage Square happened during our first 3 days, everything you saw. And we have some stories that we want to tell you about what happened post the mission. Starting with quickly our volunteering at an organization called Leket.
So we had the privilege of staying longer in Israel after the mission. The mission was only 3 days, and most of the participants had to get on a plane and fly home. But we were there. Our friends, Debbie and Barry, who many of you have met, actually participated in the mission with us. They have lots of ties and family in Israel. They actually have an apartment in Tel Aviv. So at the end of the mission, we went to Tel Aviv and we stayed with them in their apartment. And we're so glad that we did, because, we've just been sharing with you now the litany of all the horror, all the terror, all the difficult things that we saw in connection to the 7th of October. Well, post-mission, we were staying in Jerusalem. Post-mission, we were in Tel Aviv, and we were out on the street, and we were in the market, and we were, in real-time Israel, post-October the 7th. And it was like, such a shock to the system, I think in a good way, because it reminds you of the resiliency of the Jewish people and the people of Israel. The mission ended on Thursday night. Friday, and that night we stayed with Debbie and Barry. Friday, we walked down the street to the Carmel Market. And the Neve Tzedek, every Friday there, for those who were with us, you might remember all those wonderful artisans who display their wares on the street. Packed. It was Friday. The market was packed with Israelis shopping and seeing all the art and buying food and buying to take back to their homes for Shabbat. It was so filled with life that what happened? Hey guys, I thought we were mourning here. And it's not that they've forgotten October the 7th. Those signs are still everywhere. Everyone still needs a hug. But we saw this resiliency of Israel, that continues to live. And we had the opportunity to do a little bit more volunteering with an organization called Leket that was in place long before October the 7th. What Leket does is to use volunteers from Israel and from abroad to come and reclaim food, both from restaurants and markets who have products that they can't sell. They have in excess things that would otherwise be thrown away, and from farmers all around the country, and they have some of their own fields. So we volunteered with Leket, and we weren't picking oranges, we were digging up potatoes.
We also got to see, and some of you have had Ron as our wonderful, wonderful guide, and we got to see Ron, and we spent 3 hours with Ron. And the only thing I want to say about it is, if you look at Ron and you know him, he's a very, very happy person. He's always smiling. He's always positive. And he was a changed man. He lives in Ashkelon. He had to evacuate the first few weeks. And he's angry, and he's sad, and he's changed. So as much as this hustle and bustle about what's going on in Israel and everything, there's also, everybody has been affected. Everybody has been affected. There's Yaakov. Many, many trips of ours. Yaakov was our guide. That's our best friend, Debbie and Barry's. That's his brother-in-law. And so you might have met Yaakov and Michelle. And we went to their house. And first we want to tell you about what they're doing as a small kfar, a small group that lives together. It's how many, few hundred families on it. What a difference they can make, and what Israelis are doing to help each other at this time.
So they were doing it every day, preparing meals for the soldiers. Not that the soldiers are going to starve if they don't get these meals. They get those MREs, those meals ready to eat, but I see someone who served in the armed forces making a face. So they got together as, all the volunteers, especially many of them are retired. They had a lot of time on their hands, and decided, we're going to make meals for the soldiers. This is something we can do. We can make a difference in some small way. So every day they would buy the produce, and people in their own kitchens would cook chicken and make a stew and all the things that they made, and they would converge on the Mirpeset, the patio of Michelle and Yaakov, and come, in mass as volunteers, stand around a table and package all this food. And someone would drive it down to Gaza, to the military base there, and give it to them to bring in to the soldiers.
At the beginning, they were making 200 to 300 meals a day. A day. Now, after 6 months, they're making about that much.
That's a delicious
on a weekly
schnitzel sandwich. Sign me up.
And there's some of the soldiers receiving it.
Now they're doing it once a week, but they're still putting out 200 to 300 meals every week.
This is a picture. We spent Shabbat at Michelle and Yaakov's. Some of you actually have been there and been to their home. And, they have been family of ours. They're my best friend's family, but they are our family because we've known them for 43 years. When we lived in Israel in 1981, 82, they were our home away from home, and they have been ever since. So we were invited to a Shabbat dinner. And just a short story, as you can see on the left behind Barry, there's Reuven and Pessy, two people, older people on the left. They're in their 80s. They live in Carmia in a kibbutz in the south. In October, that's Yaakov's sister and brother-in-law. And on October 7th, they knew that they were going to need to leave the kibbutz. And a day later, they came to Yaakov and Michelle's and stayed with them. They were still 6 months later staying with them. Literally, Yaakov had to build a special platform in their small little safe room so that Pessy's wheelchair could fit in there. They fit 19 people in their small little safe room that was made for about 9 or 10 people.
Think about your bathroom at home. That's about the size of their safe room.
Yaakov and Michelle's daughter, Hilah, and her husband and 3 children gave up their apartment to families that were evacuated on October 7th. And so they gave up their apartment because they needed a place, and they went and also lived with Michelle and Yaakov. And you can see all the kids and the family, and they've all been together in a very close and different environment for 6 months. And Reuven, the brother-in-law on the left, stood up in the middle of Shabbat dinner, made a toast in Hebrew, which we're not fluent in Hebrew, but he spoke slowly and we got almost every word. We definitely got the sentiment.
Even if you didn't understand a word of Hebrew, you would be crying because you could understand the sentiment of what he was saying.
What he said was that
expressing his gratitude for the family.
Even amidst the horror and the stress of everything that he's gone through in the last 6 months, he felt so blessed that he could get to know Yaakov's kids and grandkids so well. It was like a relationship that they never would have had before. So the fact that they could think about blessings just shows that resilience. We were sobbing, as you can imagine. It was quite a Shabbat I think I'll never forget. So there he is. And now these are some pictures of what's happening in the Carmel market that Jason was talking about. And this man, he embroiders using his sewing machine, and he makes beautiful pictures and sells them. And this was a man that's from Germany, and he lives in Israel, and he draws pictures that he sees of landscape around Israel, and then he colors them in, and we had a beautiful conversation with him. And if you can see closely on the left-hand side, you see bolts of fabric, and it shows this is a fabric shop, and then you see this is what they call the graffiti art, but it's everywhere. Bring them home, but it's everywhere. This is the little red-headed Bebus twins that are siblings that have been taken hostage.
And the makeshift memorials everywhere. This is Dizengoff Circle. A lot of foot traffic in the middle of Tel Aviv. This fountain is in the middle. It was renovated several years ago. And totally surrounding it, as you can see, there are all these memorials and pictures and teddy bears.
It feels kind of
beaten
like
up.
9/11, doesn't it? Yeah, that's what we felt like. And these are some of those, they're called nitwits or something like that. And they had them all along Rothschild, every tree. You can't see it very well, but you can see it's like I'm wearing this pin. But they have different ones on every tree that have been knitted by people and put up. Posters everywhere.
You've all heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Somebody said this during our visit. We don't have PTSD because we're not in the post. This is still happening. Even though the events of October the 7th and the days that followed are over, this is far from over. They're still going through the trauma of the uncertainty of this time in the history of modern Israel.
So we did see beautiful Jerusalem. We spoke with our friends Debbie and Barry this morning and last night after the Iran attack. They were on their way home. They were supposed to be getting on an airplane to come home. Debbie's daughter is is having a baby, and there's a baby shower this week. And their flight was canceled, and the airport was closed, as you probably have heard. We talked to them, and she has been telling us this whole week that the mood of the country has changed even since the day after we left, not 10 days ago. Because I know people are asking us, what's the mood of the country? And when we were there, it was still fairly optimistic. There's a sense of depression and worry, but people were optimistic. She said now, when all these things happened this week with the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Syria and now Iran, she said there's been a huge shift, and that there's a very high percentage anti-government protests have been about hostage release, and now they're very anti-government. There's despair, pessimism, especially about the hostages and how many are really alive. And they're just unsettled and fearful. And it was really, really sad to hear. Just want to give you one little statistic. We hear numbers all the time, and I want you to talk to people about this. We hear about the 33,000 Gazans, civilians, 90% children and women. This is what we're hearing on the news, right, of being killed. And I have total compassion for any civilian, innocent person being hurt or killed on any side of any border. But we need to know some things. When you hear facts like there's 33,000 and people killed, you need to know that the UN itself puts out data. And according to the data, civilians usually make up 90% of casualties. That's one combatant to 9 civilians. Civilians that are killed, one combatant to 9 civilians. That's kind of the data, the history of wars. In Israel, they've killed 13,000 plus terrorists. 33,000 are supposed to have been killed. If you put that ratio together, that's one combatant, one terrorist for every 1.5 or 6 civilian. But nobody talks about this.
That's nothing to celebrate.
No, but
it's a reality to know
Yeah.
that Israel is not targeting civilians. They're trying to save their country. They need to rid the world of Hamas. Gaza will be better without Hamas. And Hamas uses the civilians as human shields, as you've heard. But so the loss of every life, as Lindy said, is tragic. But the loss of civilian life in this conflict is actually much, much less than in all the history of warfare that precedes it. They're doing their best to fight this war. You know, the rules of warfare, they're not targeting civilians. They're not.
They have made mistakes, and it happens in war, and they need to own up to it, and they do. We're not saying that they don't. But they've been doing an amazing job with what they're allowed to do. I'm going to take questions in just a second. I just want to show you that as we left the airport, this is what we see. And we did have a Havdalah in the hostage square, and there were hundreds of people gathered, hostage families, people from the Reform movement, and just regular secular Israelis. And there's some things that we all share.
It was. Because
I was taking
she's standing there holding her phone, recording.
So that's our formal presentation.
I just want to say one more thing.
Yes.
You know, we've given a lot of information today. We've told you a lot of stories. If there's one thing to walk away from this talk understanding, I hope it's that there is despair. This is a terrible, difficult time in the history of the modern state of Israel. But on the other hand, there's also tremendous resolve and tremendous strength, and even some reasons to be optimistic. One of the things that was revealed in this conflict was the dedication of the young generation of Israelis. You know, it wasn't that long ago that Israel was a very small, poor country. And, you know, today it is a startup nation, right? Very prosperous, very strong. It's an affluent country today. And people, the older generation who have fought in the wars of Israel, 1967, 1973, a lot of those veterans are still alive today. And they assumed that this younger generation was only interested in a startup and in buying a fancy car and in buying their homes, and they didn't really care much about the country, and they weren't patriotic. So we're talking about the young adults who finished their army service and now, you know, starting their careers and their families. Well, it's this group of Israelis that are serving in the reserves. It's this group of Israelis who left their families and their jobs and their startup and their children and their spouses and put on their uniform and have been on the front, whether it's in Gaza or up in the north, for all these months. Some of them sitting in a tank literally, as Ron put it, for 3 months, pooping in a bag. It's a horrible thought to conceive. But they're doing it. They're showing up. They love their country, and they're ready to make a sacrifice in order to preserve and protect the nation. It's an astounding realization. The older generation feels so good knowing that you have a future generation, because these young people, they're the ones who are going to be serving in the Knesset and in the cabinet. These are the future leaders of Israel. They still love their country. Ein li eretz acheret. I have no other land. So that's reason for hope and optimism. You know, we have to hold simultaneously in our understanding of this conflict both the tragedy and the difficulty and the complexity of the conflict, but also the resolve of the Jewish people and of the tiny nation of Israel to survive and to thrive. One of our good friends in Israel posted a video from this morning. Okay, remember last night, 300 ballistic missiles and drones fired down upon Israel? This morning, when all was quiet, there were hundreds of Israelis folk dancing on the beach, on the Tayelet, the big walkway along the beach in Tel Aviv. How do you square that? I think it's a wonderful image that helps us to understand the psyche of Israelis today. And with that,
We know there might be some questions, but Karma, how do you want to?
Before the Q&A, I'd like to invite 7th and 8th grade and Sababa to join me in the Sababa room. If we can head out now, guys, that'd be great. And for